You're listening to Where You Live with Gene and Tony.
Welcome back to Where You Live. We're broadcasting live from the Concierge Landscape Studios. And for our listeners here in the second hour, I'd like to remind you we have a free newsletter that is a great resource to have. It's called What's New. We publish it every other month, and a lot of the topics we cover on the radio show we cover in further detailed in that newsletter. Give us a call during the week at 952-922-2500. Ask for Courtney. She'll make sure that you start receiving your copy. We have over 18,000 people subscribing right now. Also, I'd like to mention to folks, too, in the beginning in the first hour, too, we also talked a little bit, Tony and I did, about how do you know when your governing documents need to be amended? Well, again, you could give us a call, contact us at New Concept and ask for your handy checklist. A lot of the items that we covered, we'd be happy to give to you as well. Again, the number at New Concept is 952-922-2500. But, Tony, I said during our last break here that right now we would be tackling the question, can board members be compensated for their service to the association?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And my reaction would be, no, of course not. It's probably against the law.
And that's probably something that most people think about when they think about someone serving on the board. And that's probably the first response everybody is going to have. That, no, you can't do that.
It's got to be against the law. Is that the truth?
No, it's not against the law. That's the truth.
Ah.
It's interesting that we're asked that question quite a bit. And, folks, there are two specific state statutes that deal with that specific question. One is State Statute 317A, which is the Minnesota Nonprofit Corporation Act, dealing with all nonprofit corporations. Then, of course, there's something more specific, 515B, which we have known as MCIWA, which is the Minnesota Common Interest Ownership Act. And both of them, none of them talk about prohibiting board members from being paid.
Okay, so those are the two main pieces of legislation that govern homeowners associations, and neither one of them prohibits paying a board member. Is that right?
No, but the idea of having someone who is representing you in government, whether that be an association, state, or even the federal level, that has been whether they should be paid or not. That's a debate that goes back even to our founding fathers.
I was going to say Thomas Jefferson.
Back then, the idea was, people that are going to be representing us in Congress, in the Senate, this is a part-time job, not a full-time one, so we shouldn't have people that are paid.
Well, I think Thomas Jefferson even thought it would be the wealthier people, the wealthier men, that would even be interested in serving on the government. It was seen as a public service, not as a job. And he just assumed that the people who could afford to do it would be the wealthy.
Yeah, and and that was the debate. You had someone like Thomas Jefferson who said, "Well, no, we will get people who are well established, who will be representing us and are doing it not for money. So there's not this idea for sordid gain. Whereas if you have someone who needs this for a living, they're going to work it for all that they can.
That's right.
However,
and they won't be truly representing us.
Yes. However, you have someone like Ben Franklin who is the complete opposite of that. He said, no, we should have a little money paid to people because he said we want to have not just the wealthy, not just a different class of people representing.
Sure.
We want to have the broadest possible ability of folks to have the ability to serve and represent us. And that is true in a homeowner association as well. You want to have the broadest sense of the people living there to be representative of that homeowners association. And so you're dealing with something that, of course, it is a volunteer position. It is only part-time.
However, it is an elected position.
It is an elected
We forget
position.
that because so often board members don't get elected. They just speak up and raise their
Yeah.
hand and say they will do it.
Yeah. For most, so folks, if you're thinking, is it against the law? It's not against the law. However,
To compensate.
there is something else that does give us these prohibitions, and that is generally the governing documents of that particular homeowner association.
That other set of rules and regs and documents that control and govern a
Yes.
homeowners association.
So 515B, what's known as MCIWA, the Minnesota Common Interest Ownership Act, does not say
Right.
we'll prohibit it, but what they do say is that the specifics in the governing documents supersede even the state statute,
well, they decide.
and that
yeah.
and they make
yeah.
that decision,
Yeah.
and that is, in this case, you'll find that in most
Right.
homeowners governing documents, that is where there is generally some language that says board members will not be compensated.
That's right. It's very common.
Yeah. So with that, but let's take that aside. If that wasn't there, would it be a good idea? What do you think, Tony?
Well, oh boy, would it be a good idea to compensate them? I say not. Simply because of the reasons that Thomas Jefferson gave, and that is this should be a public service by volunteers. We don't want people taking this position because it's a job for them, because I'm not sure that they would truly represent their constituents, which are the homeowners.
Yeah. And you're right. It's not supposed to be a position where someone is ensconced for years and years, although that
There you
does
go.
happen.
Yeah, it does.
But, there are a lot of people who try to get around this.
So they have the prohibition in their governing documents. You cannot
Mm-hmm.
compensate board members, and they try and get around that issue.
Oh, yes, and they still
How do they do
and
that?
I wanted to kind of bring up right now for our listeners some of the ways that, to me, are just rationalizing something that is prohibited according to your governing documents. So what some people will say are, board members shouldn't be compensated. Well, technically, they're not being compensated. We're not giving them money. All that we're going to do is we won't assess them their dues. Or we will assess them less than
They'll
the
get a
full amount.
discount. Yeah. All right.
And you know what? Even though currency does not exchange hands, that is still receiving compensation.
That's still compensation. That's
Still,
right.
the IRS would consider that too.
That's right.
And no, so that is, if that is your thinking, that's you're rationalizing.
That's wrong thinking.
Yes, it is, and against the law. Another way that people will do it, they'll say, well, we're not paying someone for sitting on the board, but we're self-managed and it takes a lot of work to do the bookkeeping.
Right.
So let's pay the treasurer to do the bookkeeping. I understand that.
Me
because
too. It's a big job.
There is a lot of work that's involved that's
Yeah.
more than just a volunteer.
Yeah.
However, the governing documents still are very clear.
Yeah.
The treasurer, even this, if their duty is that they're still being compensated, you would still have an issue. I would say that would still be wrong.
I agree.
We had an association a few years ago where that was the case, and it was really hard because the people that were on the board were new, and they said, but this is the way it's always been. And it had been. It's been a self-managed association for 30 years, and they always had paid the treasurer to do that.
Yeah.
And so they had this history, and here I was telling them, I'm sorry, it can't be.
Yeah.
And they went into, we got around that so that the treasurer was not compensated. And the other issue was, according to the governing documents, the only people that could handle some of the banking functions was the treasurer. So a
They
management
couldn't
company
even hire
do it.
someone?
No.
Oh, my.
And so
Okay.
they ended up, of course, was one of the reasons why they needed to change their governing documents, and they made
There
some
you go.
amendments. And now it's a much more relaxed situation.
Yeah. It's a good point to mention that most governing documents allow an association to hire professionals to carry out some of their tasks. Most governing documents allow for that. It's just those professionals are not serving on the board.
So in this particular case, you couldn't say to that person, if they had stayed self-managed, and you said to that treasurer, okay, well, don't be on the board, but just do the bookkeeping.
Yeah.
Now they couldn't do the bookkeeping because governing document said that only someone on the board could do it.
There you go.
So whoever wrote it was saying whoever did it is doing this work has got to do it for free.
Yeah.
And so that, but these are things that people try to do to try and get around that
prohibition.
Other than money or saying that there's going to be a reduction in dues, some people will say, we'll just give you preferential treatment. We'll give you other services. So we will give you additional landscaping. I saw one association where it was a condo and they had cleaning. They didn't give anybody in the board compensation with money. That would be wrong. But they had the caretaker do the cleaning in their homes.
Oh, I see. Yeah. They got a service, a free service.
Yes. And again, all of that is
that's compensation.
Some compensation, something of value, and it's skirting around the issue. You can't do it.
Yeah, that's right.
But, there's another reason why I think folks can't allow compensation to take place.
You think there's a good reason to prohibit compensation to board members?
Yes.
And what is it?
And to me, that is, it goes down to what's called the Volunteer Protection Act of 1997.
Okay.
There was, this was during Clinton's administration, there came a time when they were addressing the question, here are people who are serving as volunteers in a nonprofit organization, and something happens where something goes wrong, and these people are being sued.
Okay. All right.
Now, in a homeowners association, if you're on the board of directors and volunteering, there is what's called directors and officers insurance, for errors and omissions.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, that is something that homeowner associations have.
Right.
But a lot of other nonprofit organizations don't have insurance policies.
Oh, that will help protect their volunteers.
Nobody requires that. And so here's where the government came in and they said, we see a gap here. And so what we need to do is we need to say, we're going to come in with this law and say that if you're a volunteer for a nonprofit organization, you should be, unless it was for something that was willful or flagrant disregard.
Sure.
But we're talking about
accidents
an accidental
oversights.
mistake.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't be sued.
Okay.
If a person starts receiving compensation in this act, according to the act, Volunteer Act of 1997, once you receive over $500 worth of value, you're no longer considered a volunteer.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden you're being considered a professional.
Okay, so for the purposes of this act, they had to define what is a volunteer.
Yes.
And a volunteer is someone who receives $500 or less compensation. That makes a lot of sense. If you're getting paid, you've become a professional in that situation.
Yes, and so at that point, you've got to buck up and start taking the responsibility that you could have the same liability of other professionals who are acting that way because people are trusting you in that role.
So you suddenly become a professional. You suddenly become as responsible as the property management company that's hired.
And so to me, that would be one of the chief reasons why you would probably not want to have compensation.
There you go.
Is because this protection, this umbrella of coverage is gone from the volunteer board once they start getting paid.
Yep. Paid employees have a greater degree of accountability to the board, don't you think?
Yes, it stands to reason.
Yep.
Well, we are going to take one last break. Folks, when we come back, we want to talk about one last story here. We call it the ugly side of homeowner living. Just because you're an adult doesn't mean you act like one. That and some final comments after these messages.